Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm Andy RC and this is part 4 of my iFlight based freestyle copter featuring the iFlight all-in-one Flyduino license KISS flight controller, which is based on the KISS V1 flight controller. And today we are going to see how it actually flies. Now, I'm not surprised that this series hasn't been as popular as some of my other videos because Betaflight is the go-to firmware as it's open source and will work on pretty much any hardware. Whereas KISS is closed source, which kind of forces you to 3 or 4 flight controllers. And if you want everything to work easily, you might as well have KISS ESCs because their serial number based system will block the pass-through of a non-KISS ESC, making it more challenging to get everything going. But what interested me about this setup, at the making of this video, this is the only all-in-one flight controller and it's also not made by Flyduino, and honestly I think they've done a better job with it being a power distribution board and a built-in on-screen display and a much easier solution to configure the on-screen display. If you want that with the Flyduino based KISS hardware, then you have to mess around with a MinimOSD board and an FTDI adapter, which I've done a video on in the past and it's not fun, and I'll link that in the below. Or you have to buy into one of the expensive Impulse PDBs. For example, on my Alien I've got the Mr. Steel PDB, which costs double the price of the iFlight flight controller on its own at the time I bought it anyways, which has the exact same flashing procedure shown in part 3 of this series, except with the Mr. Steel PDB, if you don't disconnect it from the flight controller when you're flashing the on-screen display firmware, then you will fry the flight controller, and there's no frying going on with the iFlight all-in-one flight controller. There's also the Wolf PDB, which has its own GUI, but it's sold out everywhere locally in the UK, as is the Mr. Steel PDB. So if I want to buy one now, I have to pay the postage from Impulse RC, who are based in Australia, so once again the price is high. And those PDBs are limited somewhat to the Alien and the Reverb as well. So with the iFlight all-in-one flight controller, you can use it with any frame because it's all-in-one and it just sits on a 30x30 stack. So for a full Flyduino KISS setup and on-screen display, it's not cheap and it's not all-in-one either. So that's why I've made these videos, because everyone wants to fly like Mr. Steel or Final Glide Oz, and they are running expensive KISS setups, albeit the V2 KISS boards, which for the moment at least are still running at 1K when it comes to the PID loop frequency, which the V1 can do. In fact, the only thing that the V1 can't seem to do is go higher than Dshot1200, so that is a downside of it. So this board is cheap and already has everything built in. You could pair it with some cheap ESCs. So at the end of this video, I'll do a conclusion as to what I think about all of this and compare the prices to this system against a full Flyduino KISS setup. So first of all, you will see a line of sight flight where I copied Chad Nowak's setup of his KISS-based V2 Reverb, which they posted in a Rotor Riot video, so I'll link that in the below, because those settings work perfect with my Alien, which was also running KISS V2. But let's see how those settings work with this setup. Okay, let's go for a line of sight with this guy. I'm starting off in angle mode just to make sure that everything is okay. And it seems it. So let's see if we can hear any oscillations when I'm doing a throttle punch. No oscillations, but there wasn't a huge amount of power there, which for me suggests that I can go up on the pitch of the props, but that's fine. So that was full throttle there. Saw a bit of a wobble, but that could have been me on the sticks. Okay, let's try acro. Might be the case that this guy needs a PID tune. I think somebody has actually put a preset for this guy in KISS, but really it's best that you tune them yourself. Using the new Tattoo R-Line V3s here, so this is the 1550, but it weighs a little bit less than the V2, which with a high volt, and it's got a higher C rating as well, 120 C against, I think it was 100 or 95. Yeah, kind of hard to tell with the tune, but at least it is flying. Wonder if I can get an FPV flight in before we completely lose the light. Okay, let's bring it in for a landing. And let's feel if there's any heat in the motors. Just a little bit actually, so it might be the case that those P gains are a little bit too high. Yeah, definitely some heat in those motors, so I think I might need to reduce that. Let's unplug the battery, and while I'm here I'll show you the V3. I think I might have shown it already though. Wow, that is really stuck to that silicon mat. There we go. Yeah, so Tattoo V3 1550. So let's take a look at some DVR footage, and as the copter is sat on the ground, I'm seeing some lines of interference. It's not much. It probably won't even show on YouTube. I think that is coming from the 5-volt regulator on this board. I think it's a little bit noisy. I showed in part 1 when I plugged it into a 5-volt Unify. It got a load of noise. Also though, I believe this FXT camera is based on the Predator, and I also get a little bit of noise from that as well. So yeah, I'm not too sure about this camera. However, I am switching all of my cameras out to CMOS cameras, and here is why. You see, it's what photographers call golden hour at the moment, so the sun hasn't quite set, but it's almost there. And I found throughout the year, flying with friends in different locations and flying through the winter, that the sun is always low on the horizon. And you might be looking at the DVR and thinking, oh, that's all washed out. It is washed out, but at least I can see where I'm going. You see, we went to a certain location and my friend Rich had a CMOS camera, and he was able to fly in locations where I couldn't, because the difference in contrast between when it was sunny and then going inside, I'd crash, whereas he got a perfect picture. Even when looking directly into the sun, he could see things around him. So I think my favorite camera is the Runcam Sparrow Mini 2, and I'm switching all of my cameras out to that, and I'm just taking it on the nose, the chromatic effects, and also this washout that you get in lower light. Anyways, let's talk about the rest of the copter. So there is a little bit of video noise coming from the electrical system. So these iPeaka ESCs come with a Panasonic branded 220 microfarad low ESR capacitor, and I don't think that is quite enough, so perhaps they need to be bigger to get rid of that noise, but it's just only slight, so it's not bothering me. So I don't know, maybe I will leave it. As for does this fly like KISS, I would say yes, it does. I mean, maybe I'm not the best judge. I really like how KISS flies, and I love how this flies. By the way, this is using the setup that I showed in part 2, where I switched the PIDs because the motors were getting too warm. There's a little bit more work needs doing on the PIDs, I think, because KISS is more sensitive to PIDs than Betaflight, I think. But in general, I was really happy how it was flying. So if we take a look at the temperatures of the ESCs, so yeah, that is all well within tolerance, I would say. And this is still with that same prop. And I think, look at that, so yeah, I don't think it went over 75 amps or at least 80 amps. So I could probably go up in pitch with this prop. So this is the 5040 prop still. And you can see there we're not getting a huge amount of voltage sag either. And also the RSSI meter is behaving nicely as well. Now the GoPro actually doesn't suit this lighting condition as well as the FPV camera, so it doesn't do dynamic range very well. However, I think combined with this frame, it's going to be a fantastic freestyle copter. You get the props out of shot, and I think in better lighting conditions you would get some superb shots. But if we switch back to the DVR, you can see that we are getting close to 1500 milliamps. So this is the 1550 Tattoo V3. So it seems like the current meter is accurate, and of course it's taking the current from the ESC telemetry, so it's missing out the VTX, the flight controller, and the camera. So it's just gonna show just slightly under, but there is the flight, 4 minutes 23, and it's back to the studio or bed.
Okay, let's see if I can wrap this thing up. Now, I didn't get a chance to talk about the XING or XING motors, but I think they're the prettiest motors on the market that you can buy today. They were silky smooth as well. As for the bearings, time will tell whether they'll last or not. I'll have to update you on that. And I touched on the flight video around the iPeaka ESCs and them having a 220 microfarad 25 volt low ESR capacitor, and I was getting some slight noise. Perhaps they could be bigger. However, if you had a smaller frame, it might be more difficult to fit those in. I suppose you could fit them backwards. So the VTX was getting a little bit of noise, like I say, and I think that's also in part because the all-in-one flight controller does not have a decent regulator. So it's got a 5 volt regulator for your receiver and also your camera, but a lot of VTXs these days require 7 volts and above, and this iForce VTX is the same. And I think a inbuilt regulator that was 7 volts or 9 volts or even 12 volts would have been good for this, and I hope that iFlight do continue to update this and maybe even come out with a version based around the KISS V2. I kind of have a feeling though that the only reason that this was allowed is that Flyduino have moved on to the KISS V2, so they were sort of willing to give the V1 information away. Yeah, I've talked very positively about this flight controller, but it does have its downsides. For example, most KISS builds are freestyle builds, but the battery connector comes out of the back rather than the side, so I think that would have made things a lot easier. But I really like the frame, and considering this is an early version, maybe even a prototype of the frame, I can only imagine that the version that you get now is better. We've got a huge space for a battery along the top with the silicone mat. I really like the straps, and even with me having the XT60 coming out of the top here, there's room for an 1800 milliamp battery. So how does this compare against KISS? Well, if we talk about the price, if we just forget about the ESCs and focus on the board here. So let's just say you wanted a Flyduino KISS V1 board. I've had a look, and with shipping it costs about 30 GBP. This board on its own, with its power distribution board, its on-screen display, is 33 GBP. So if you wanted to have an on-screen display, the cheapest option for the Flyduino board would be a micro minim on-screen display. Those are about 5 GBP, and you'd also have to get a capacitor for that as well, and you'd need an FTDI board, and that would cost around about 5 GBP. You need a capacitor, by the way, because on the micro MinimOSD, the chip is very sensitive to voltage spikes or drops in voltage, and it will actually reset the board if you do a punch out. So that's a downside if you want to use a micro minim on-screen display. And you'd also have to get a power distribution board because the original KISS V1 requires 5 volts, whereas this can just plug the battery straight into it. So a power distribution board, again, about 5 GBP. So removing the ESCs out of the equation, this all-in-one board here costs 33 GBP, and you'd be looking at around about 40 to 43 GBP if you wanted to do it the Flyduino way. So this board is more convenient, it takes up less space in the stack, and I think that's actually why this wasn't that heavy. It compares to the Skystars Star-Lord, it's only 10 grams heavier than that, whereas my Alien build, I think, with a battery is something like 672 grams. This one is 480 grams without a battery. So yeah, although I did explain in another part of the series that weight is not a bad thing for a freestyle copter because you get less prop wash oscillations. But there you go. If you want to go the Flyduino route, then it is more expensive, and I think it's a little bit more fiddly as well, because with the iFlight all-in-one board you are given this. However, I did struggle with it. Now, the on-screen display worked flawlessly. The issue that I had was the pass-through. Now, iFlight tell me, and other people tell me, that they had success with this board getting the BL pass-through to work, but I just couldn't get it to work no matter how I tried. So I'll tell you the things that I tried to get it work. In fact, I tried so much that I actually broke the plastic off the top of the board, detaching it so many times. But in part 2, I think it was, I tried to show this working. So this plugs into the underneath of the flight controller, and then you plug the USB in with this jumper shorted here, and BL Heli pass-through should just work, and it just wouldn't. I would get an error. So the things that I tried was to go back to the original firmware that this came on, because I upgraded it to the latest. I just wondered whether there was a problem there, and it still didn't work. I got the error. Something that I did try, though, is it's an old trick used when flashing old KISS ESCs, is that if you press the bootloader button whilst powering up the flight controller, then it bypasses all of the serial number blockage that stops the pass-through from working. Now, I plugged in a USB connector while holding down the button, and then plugged this in, and then plugged the battery in, and it didn't recognize it. However, what I thought I would do is go back to the original firmware, as I mentioned, and I pressed the bootloader button and plugged in the battery, and 2 of the ESCs got recognized all of a sudden, but only 2. And I thought, why is that? Is that because I went in and changed the direction in the KISS GUI? So I reset everything, even the motor direction, but it still only showed 2 ESCs, whereas when I was flying it, obviously all of the ESCs are being recognized by the flight controller. So there's something wrong. Oh, I also tried different drivers as well. So I took other copters where the 32-bit ESC worked, and I tried to copy the driver, and then it just didn't recognize the board whatsoever, so it's not a driver issue. I'm not sure. Maybe this board is faulty. It could just be something as simple as that. However, I've spoken to a couple of people who are asking me, how do I get this thing to work, because I'm having exactly the same problem as you. So maybe it is the case that we need to desolder the telemetry wire and also the signal wire and make a lead up and hook it up like this, or just get a BL-Hali32 USB flasher tool and do it that way. Again, you'd have to unsolder it. My big point about this, though, is that the only reason I need BL-Hali Suite is to switch the motor direction. I don't touch any of the other settings. Maybe you do, and if you need that, then maybe this isn't for you. But I showed in part 2 of this series that you can change the motor direction within the KISS GUI in a specific sequence, so it doesn't really matter to me that this doesn't work. And if you were to use the original Flyduino KISS board and non-KISS ESCs, you'd have to jump through the same holes that I'm having to do here, which is kind of why if you go KISS, everybody is forced to use KISS ESCs, because then the pass-through just works, because it checks the serial of each ESC and goes, yep, this is genuine KISS stuff, will let you access everything. So for those who are interested in this system, I hope this video series has been helpful to you, and if you have any further questions, then put them in the comments below. But remember, this has been a 4-part series, so there will be a playlist, and those questions may be answered in the other parts, so go and check those out. I'll link to all of the parts that I have used in this build, and this has taken up a lot of my time, but it was just so different, and there was a bit of learning that needed to be done, and I can just build a Betaflight build, no problems, and it's just very easy. This was more of a challenge, and that's why I wanted to take it on, and that's why it's in 4 parts. And there's also more things that you have to do, and I know that will be a comment that will be said a lot. However, this is going to stay in my Freestyle fleet because it flies great and it gets great footage. So as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.